We've heard a lot about the cover-up of the grooming gangs scandal. We know that whether it was journalists, civil servants or council officials, whether it was senior individuals in the police or community leaders, there was definitely the sign that people wanted to turn a blind eye to this scourge of our country. But what hasn't been so much discussed is why was this a particular problem within a particular community? My name's Tom Harwood and this is GB News Originals. Do remember to click that subscribe button for more original content. Now we all know about the grooming gang scandal. Predominantly Pakistani men, predominantly Muslim and predominantly from the region of Mirpur within Pakistan, systematically carrying out the group-based sexual assault of children up and down this country over years and years and years. Only now are we getting a full inquiry into what exactly went on, what the failings were that refused to look at this properly, how people who were trying to point it all out were shut down and not listened to for such a long time. But what hasn't been so discussed is why was this a particular problem within a particular community? Why were Pakistani men, and indeed why are Pakistani men, because the report's author has been saying just this week that we know this problem is likely still going on in many towns and cities across this country. But why is it a particular problem for the Pakistani Muslim community in Britain? Well, one reason could be the difference that different religions hold over the concept of consent. Now, I'm going to be very careful about what I say here because this is not at all going to talk about all Muslims. But by some interpretations of religious scripture, you can get through an understanding that different people of different religions are treated in different ways. By interpreting ancient scripture, you can find justifications for beastly things. And indeed, the idea of modern morality doesn't always exist in hundreds of years old texts, like religious texts. The hadiths of the Muslim faith particularly could be justifying some really awful things. Now, of course, there are more reformist forms of interpreting these religions that would say, don't take these words literally. Don't follow to the letter what people did in the medieval ages. But some more extreme forms of interpretation of that religion may be feeding through into what we see now on the streets of this country. Well, we sat down today with an expert in this field, Emma Trimble, an academic and a researcher, to find out exactly what it could be that is leading to this discrepancy, that is leading to this scourge across this country. I'm delighted to be joined now by the writer, broadcaster and former extremism expert too, Emma Trimble. Emma, thanks so much for being with us. I want to get to the bottom of something that I think is not particularly widely discussed, which is why is it particularly Muslims, Pakistani Muslims, and actually specifically from one region of Pakistan, around Mirpur, that this particular clannish form of group-based child sexual exploitation seems to be so prevalent?
Well, I think there are two aspects to this, Tom, and this is the reason why this national inquiry needs to look into the religious aspect of this. So on the one hand, you've mentioned there the sort of clan aspect of this, because these are closed communities that are not necessarily integrating. Maybe, English language is not sort of at the one of their priorities. Perhaps unlikely to turn each other into the police. That's one aspect of this. But the aspect that has received much less attention is the religious side of this. And of course, both of these two aspects have been brought up, for the past decade. This is nothing new in Louise Casey's latest review. In fact, there have been people who've been banging the drum about this now for well over a decade. But some of the victims of these grooming gangs have made it very clear that there are religiously aggravated aspects to this. Some of the religious slurs are actually too explicit for me to mention on the show. I don't think Ofcom would like it very much. But referring to them as kafirs, I've got some quotes here in front of me now. One victim saying that she was told that Muslim girls are good and pure, and that all white girls are not. I'm not going to use the explicit slur. Saying that kafir girls are worthless, and that sex with a kafir girl doesn't count as adultery. And there are
Emma, to be clear, a kafir girl is a non-Muslim girl. So this was clearly targeted at people who were in the sort of out group, that Muslims were seen as pure and right, and that you couldn't possibly rape a Muslim because because God would look down on that. But raping a non-Muslim, that was sanctioned.
Absolutely. So it's sectarian, but it's also religiously motivated. And there are reasons for this. So as the historian Tom Holland has pointed out today on Twitter, there are reasons why groups like Islamic State or Boko Haram have been able to justify sexual slavery, and it's because those sources can be found within Islam. Now, there might be many Muslims who are disgusted by this, but the reality is that those sources are there in the Quran, in the Hadith, and in early biographies of the Prophet Muhammad.
Emma, is it also not fair to say that in the Hebrew Bible there is justification for slavery, sexual slavery, and some genocidal tenets as well, particularly in the Old Testament? So, I mean, is this not just about the text, but also about how the text is interpreted over the centuries?
Well, I mean, there are no current states that are interpreting the Bible in those ways, whereas we have seen recent examples of Muslims, extremist Muslims, interpreting the Quran. So, for example, there's a phrase that refers to what your right hand possesses. And we've even seen here in the UK, very recently, there was a fundamentalist preacher who has now been banned, but he did go on tour in the UK, and it has been filmed saying that it is halal, it is permissible for men to have sex with female slaves. So, this is a man who drew an audience in the United Kingdom. It is a serious problem that even in, early biographies of the Prophet Muhammad, in some of those sources is said to have had non-Muslim concubines, a Christian concubine, a Jewish concubine. Right. And so, these things are, even if they are disputed by Muslims today who interpret this differently, the reality is that there are people who are in the United Kingdom and in other places around the world who are taking this interpretation that it is halal to have sex slaves. And in fact, we've seen it very recently in Iraq, for example, slave market of non-Muslim Yazidi Christian women.
And the issue is when people within the community aren't willing to call it out. And that's clearly has been the case over so many years in this country, unfortunately. But Emma, you will have seen that a lot of people have been sharing statistics that show allegedly that 88% of convicted child sex offenders are white. There have been letters written in the past, co-signed by groups like the NSPCC, saying that narratives around grooming gangs can perpetuate racism and other types of bigotry. I mean, what would you say to that charge?
Well, I think there are two aspects to this. The assumption has always been on the part of the authorities that it would upset the Muslim community if they dealt with this. You could make the argument that that's actually quite Islamophobic. If they think that many Muslims would condemn this, then they have no reason to believe that it should upset them. Of course, the other aspect of this is, and this is something that Louise Casey has actually brought up in this review, is that the data isn't being collected on this. So we don't actually know the truth of the matter. That's one of the things that this national inquiry needs to do, is to get the data so we understand what exactly is happening here.
Yeah, Diane Abbott and others are continuing to share this type of data to basically shut down the conversation around this issue. Emma Trimble, thank you so much for coming on this afternoon.
Well, it's a difficult topic to talk about, but What did you make of that? Do you buy into the idea that different religions have different moral codes, or at least the idea that people could interpret a different religion in a more extreme way? Is it the fact simply that the Islamic faith has not had the same reform movement that Judaism or Christianity has had in the past? Or is this over-interpreting it? Does it lie less in religion and more in culture? After all, this is predominantly Pakistani Muslim men from one specific region, a particularly underdeveloped region in Pakistan. We don't see the same sort of grooming problem with other people of Muslim backgrounds. How much can we read into this as an issue of faith or an issue of culture, or indeed an issue of clannishness? We hear that those problems are often sort of shrouded by a community. Well, all of these questions will need to be looked into in great detail by the inquiry. I don't think any of us can profess to having a full picture of all of the answers at this stage, but here at GB News Originals we'll be following closely what this inquiry finds and analysing all of its discoveries. So don't forget. Don't forget to click that subscribe button and follow all of our analysis here on the GB News YouTube channel as this inquiry unfolds.